Hey, good evening, Terranova. How are you guys doing tonight? Wow, we got a rowdy crew. Hey, I want to invite you to stand up. We're going to start like we always do by just centering our hearts and minds on the good things of God and singing together. It makes such a beautiful noise when we do. So stand on up. Let's clap along. Let's sing together. Here we go. You guys still doing okay? 3.5 minutes later? Just checking. Hey, it is such a beautiful thing. Sometimes we can take it lightly because of the repetition of how we gather every weekend, and some of us gather through the week for small groups and other things that are happening around the hub. But I think that there is such an importance. Sometimes the most important things we do in life seem so simple and natural, and we can take them for granted. But there's something so beautiful about a group of people coming together and carving out some time from their week and saying, we're going to put each other first, we're going to put God first, we're going to put community first, and make this an important part of everything we do. So I just think it's beautiful, and I just thought we should take a second to say that. It's a commercial break, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, we can clap for that. Yeah. All right, let's keep singing. Here we go.
I wandered through the darkness, wasting away. My soul was cold and hopeless, dead in the grave. Like a river of life in a dry land, like a flicker of sight to a blind man. I saw the glorious light as it broke again. God of mercy and light. Oh, you brought me back to life. You're the Lord of light, shining in the dark. You're the source of life, beating in my heart. You're the living hope. You're the risen Christ. You restored my soul. Oh, you brought me back to life. The brilliance of your glory awakens my soul. You give me grace and mercy, give you control. Like a river of light in a dry land, like a flicker of sight to a blind man. I saw the glorious light as it broke in. God of mercy and might. Oh, you brought me back to life. You're the Lord of light, shining in the dark. You're the source of life, beating in my heart. You're the living hope. You're the risen Christ. You restored my soul. Oh, you brought me back to life. You brought me back to life. You are the resurrector. You conquered the grave. You pulled me from the water, free from my chains, and risen to live. Like a river of light in a dry land, like a flicker of sight to a blind man. I saw the glorious light as it broke in. God of mercy and might. Oh, you brought me back to life. You're the Lord of light, shining in the dark. You're the source of light, beating in my heart. You're the living hope. You're the risen Christ. You restored my soul. Oh, you brought me back to life. 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 Brought me back to life. Like a river of light in a dry land, like a flicker of sight to a blind man. of the glorious light as it broken. God of mercy and might, oh, you brought me back to life. 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 God of creation, there at the start, for the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark, fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. The vapor of your breath, the planets form. The stars were made to worship, so will I can see your heart, everything you've made. Every burning star, signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. So will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, your syllable empty or void. losing pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. You lost your life so I could find it here. You left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart, everything you've done. Every part designed, working for called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I. Oh, I can see your heart in a billion different ways. Every one of them was a child you died to save. You gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 million times. But what measure could amount to your desire? The one who never leaves the one behind.
Man, I love that song. It's like one of my favorites. Just the sweeping arc of this unfathomably great creator God who speaks things into existence, who loves us. That's almost unbelievable. So much that he would surrender his life so we could find life. But one of the things I really love about the song is this kind of back and forth that begins to happen of like, if this is who you are, then this is who I want to be. If this is what you're about, then this is what I want to be about too. Like this active participation in our agreement and stepping into what God's doing, this story that He's creating with our lives, and that's what we're here to do. And that's what actually this thing called worship is really all about, just us adding our agreement to that. And so what a great song, what a great time to be here, and I'm so glad you guys are here. I want to welcome you. And by the way, my name is John. I just want to say, hey, welcome to Terra Nova. And before you grab a seat, I got a question for you. We were talking about it a little bit earlier this week, and so I'd like to have you have a chance to talk about it. It might make a little sense a little later. It might make no sense whatsoever. This might be the most random question you've ever been asked. But like a favorite superhero, you got one of those? Somebody you like, that's a power or that's a greatness that I would like to have, or a superhero? So there's this thing called superheroes. Have you guys heard of that? This is staring at me. Okay, it is a random question. Okay, it's a random question. You have one, maybe you don't. If you don't, just say hi to meet somebody, say nice things to them, introduce yourselves, and I'll come back in a second. Once again, welcome. My name's John. I got a name tag to prove it. Name tag's optional, but sometimes helpful. How you guys doing? So you got a favorite superhero? Maybe not. I grew up with superheroes, reading comic books. Big Spider-Man fan. Loved the wit and the banter in that one. That was one of my favorites. Well, hey, I want to say once again, welcome to Terra Nova. When you came in, you were handed one of these. We call it the weekend program, and I'd love to take a second and just talk to you about a couple of things that are in here. As you open it up, you'll see, man, there's a lot in there today, by the way. There's this big menu thing that we're going to talk about in a second. Hey, next weekend's going to be a blast. Super Bowl weekend, that's what we call it. Maybe you've heard of that before. Superheroes, Super Bowls. I don't know. But hey, after Saturday night, we're throwing a party because some of you are not going to be around on Sunday morning because you got your whole Super Bowl routines you do. So we've got a Super Saturday night party we've got a Supersize weekend that's happening, and message notes. So all kinds of things in there. But when you get through all of that, there's this flap on the back that's perforated, and I'd love to have you. Would you do this with me? This is our group exercise for the evening. Would you just take a second and tear that off and grab the pin that was sitting in your chair before you sat down? Hopefully it's not sitting there anymore, and you can grab that, write your name on there. And hey, if you're a guest with us this weekend, thank you so much for spending part of a weekend with us. We just feel really honored by that. We'd love to get to know you. If you would just, like, as much as you feel comfortable sharing about yourself, the more the merrier, and take some time during our gathering. You can fill that out. You can throw it in the offering basket at the very end of the gathering as we're leaving. And then on the back, you'll notice there's this place where you can let us know just how your week's going, how we can be praying for you. You can tell us who you're rooting for in the Super Bowl, anything like that. So take some time, work on that. But while you're working on it, I want to tell you about this big piece of thing right here. It's called the volunteer menu, and this is one of the fun things that I really love. Like twice a year we do this, where we open up all of our serving teams and say, hey, everybody jump in. And one of the things I really like about the way we do serving is the signups aren't for the rest of your life. You don't have to die to get off of a team. You can actually like switch it up like every 6 months or do different things. I really, really love that. A lot of people find a team and they just keep signing up for it over and over again. And so the way the menu works, it goes like this. So there are certain things that are just really like if I've never served in a church before, I've never really volunteered, I don't know that much. This is like the starters are great. Just dip your toe in the water. Easy entry, easy ways to connect, and there's a handful of those that are just great options. And then in the middle here, you'll see, we call it our house specialties, or our main course, and that's a lot of the really essential teams that just make our weekend gatherings happen week after week after week. Almost all of these teams are every other week, just one service a week, and so you'll see everything there from our kids to youth to just things that are happening with greeters and guest services and all of those things. That's like main course type stuff. That's why that's called that. And then on the back, you'll see there's this collection. We call them the side dishes because these aren't necessarily every week. You might only do this once a month. You might sign up for like the meals team and make a couple of meals for somebody, and then a month and a half later make a couple more. And so it really these are very, very flexible opportunities that are easy to just add on. Like you always want to get a couple of sides when you're out, not just the main course. So, and then the final list here, we call it the takeout, and this is the stuff that we do outside of our four walls. And we've got some fun ones coming up. Like we've got this Fix It Day happening this month actually. And the date is on there where we get teams together and we go and serve some of our local single parent families, just fixing stuff in their house. I was raised by a single mom, and I was really a terrible kid. I was awful. And so my mom was really on her own and nobody really to help her. And I love the fact that we do this because single parents have a tough enough road usually as it is. And so you can sign up for that team. We started off with breakfast and then we split off in a bunch of groups and we just go fix stuff. And we pay for it all and we take care of it. So there are a lot of different ways to serve, and we'll be doing this the entire month of February. So there's no gun to your head today. It's like, hey, take this home, think about it. There's a QR code you can use, and you can have discussions and go, hey, I think this would work out well. But February is just this beautiful time for everybody to jump in and say, hey, let's be a part of this together. Let's be a community together. So take a look at that, work on that, and of course that Connect card too. But today we are wrapping up a series. It's been a quick 3-week series that we've been having a lot of fun with. It's this series that's kind of like on the tail of a handful of years that started out pretty rough. The series is called This Is My Year, I Promise. So let's jump into part 3 of This Is My Year.
This year, this is my year, our year. Can you feel it? More motivation. Motivation. Synergy. Adventure. Responsibility. Intimacy. Achievement. Advancement. Determination. Focus. This is my year.
Honey, so? What do you think? Motivation, integrity, determination, synergy. Come on, honey. You're not even listening to me. I mean, I have a poster and everything this time. This is perfect. I mean business. Jack?
This is my year. I promise.
All right. Well, hey, how you all doing this evening? You doing all right? It is good to be with you. My name is Scott, and tonight we're going to be wrapping up this series, This Is My Year, I Promise. But first, I wanted to let you know that next weekend, we're going to kick off a new series. It's a series you've got a card to nearby. It's called Investigating Jesus. And in this series, we're going to be taking a look at one of the biographies written about the life of Jesus. It's written by a doctor named Luke. And if you happen to be somebody who you go, you know what, I'm more of just kind of like skeptically wired naturally. If you're the type of person where somebody says, hey, like, just trust me on this, and you say, no, like, I'm not going to try, like, I can't. I'd rather see for myself. I'd rather ask probing questions. This is a type of series you're going to enjoy. If you know people like that, then invite them out to this series, because for the original followers of Jesus, if it was going to be something where they were going to give their entire lives just to say, hey, you know what, we're all in, we're going to follow this guy, then they weren't going to do that for blind faith. They wanted evidence. They wanted something that they could trust for themselves, and they wanted certainty. And my gut says that for most of us, that's what we want as well. So we're going to dive into that next weekend. But this weekend, we are wrapping up this quick series that we're doing called This Is My Year, I Promise, where we've been acknowledging a reality that's existed, that for the last few years, there's been so much going on, that everything has been so different, it's been really difficult, that so much has really felt disrupted in our lives. And as a result, many of the things that we've had in place, like these structures or these habits, they've kind of fallen to the wayside in a bit, at least for many of us. And so as a result, what's happened is we've let go of these things, right? And as that happens, we have our health and maybe our habits and maybe our hopes for these last few years and what they would be. And then we go, you know what, that's not really panned out. And what we recognize is it's always easier to have a habit that gets broken than a habit that we start. But the last 3 years have really intensified that reality. And so now, as we're at the start of another year, and we probably have all these intentions to maybe to build or rebuild some habits or to gain some lost ground over these last few years, we've been asking ourselves, hey, what is that going to take? And where do I begin if that's the type of life that I want to live? And so far in this series, we've identified that if 2023 is going to be a year where we say, I want to deepen my faith, I want to grow spiritually, then we begin with forming some habits. And we say just this recognition that what we repeatedly do makes all the difference. It's not really our intentions. And so when it comes to the habits or the postures that are going to help us follow in the ways of Jesus, what we do is we begin to own them, and then we build upon them. Like we start with one thing, and then we build from there. And then last week, we saw that the way of Jesus was never intended to be something that we attempt to do on our own and in isolation. And that's tricky because over the last few years, I mean, more so than ever before, physical or relational isolation has been something that maybe we found ourselves in the middle of. But as author James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, he says, in order to do what I want to do, I need to be around people who are doing it and in places where it is being done. Because it's always easier to follow through with the habits that we want to incorporate in our lives if we've got people encouraging us and walking with us in that pursuit. And as the author of Hebrews wrote, and we looked at last week, that we are together in this. We are showing up with and for one another, but there's a purpose behind it. There's like this mission that we're on where together we're putting our heads together to figure out how we might move towards love and good deeds, how we could be people who make a difference in our world. I recently heard a story of a man who, for Christmas, he got a gift card to Bass Pro Shops. Some of you have been there before. You're like, I was not interested before this moment, but now I'm listening. And some of you, you're going like, I don't know what that is. But But this guy, he gets a gift card to this place, and he's not the most outdoorsy type of person. But he says, you know what, every now and then I like to go fishing, and I could use a new fishing pole. And so he decides that that's what he's going to use it for. And again, if you've never been to one of these stores before, I would just say that it is an experience if you go there, right? Like they are giant. There's one that's opening in Irvine later this year. This is a rendering of what it's supposed to look like. I mean, just ginormous. There's so much in there. They've got boats in there. They've got aquariums in there. Like this is within the store. They've got everything you need and many things you don't, right? That's what they've got there. And so this guy's got a gift card, and he enters the store, and he's greeted by a worker, and the worker asks him, hey, is there anything I could help you find? And he starts to say, you know what, do you guys have any fishing? And he goes, I'm at Bass Pro Shop. Like, of course they're going to have. So he changes his question. He goes, where would I find a fishing pole? And I imagine with a smirk on his face, the employee, he turns and with a giant swoop of his arm, he leads them not to a fishing pole or even a little aisle, but to the fishing center. I mean, this is like a forest of fishing poles, everything that you could ever want. And so this guy, he's got his gift card and he heads towards that direction. And he's just absolutely overwhelmed, as you might understand. He does not know where to begin. And so what he does is he decides that he will take that gift card, he will put it in his pocket, he will leave the store, go to his car, and drive to Walmart and pick up a fishing pole from Walmart. He's just completely overwhelmed by so many different options, so many things that are right in front of him, and he does not know where to begin. Well, as I mentioned, the difficulty of the last few years and some of the effects it's had on our lives, it hasn't just been like, oh, there's sickness and there's a virus. As I've acknowledged the ways that maybe we've isolated or pulled away from relationships, it hasn't just been like, oh, a little concerned, or I want to make sure that nobody gets sick here. You see, over the last few years, what I think has happened is it's brought to the surface so many things that were already at play. So many tensions, so many problems, so many disagreements, so many injustices that already existed in our world, in our country, in our state, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our own families. But now, more than ever before, because we've got the gift of technology, we're not only able to I could research and I could find out about that, but every morning we wake up to headlines that are thrown in front of us, and we're constantly inundated with them. Not simply all that's wrong within me and my little community, but all that's wrong in the entire world. And so I got to be completely honest with you as we're starting today. I have to say that when I see this series unfolding, week one, we go, hey, this is my year to deepen my faith. I say, for anybody who's interested in doing that, that feels like something that's attainable. Because you go, okay, I know there's God's Spirit at work, but if I want to begin to form some habits in my life, I can actually do that. And so I feel really good about that. And then there's week two, and week two, this is my year to strengthen my community. And we know community can be messy, it can be difficult, but for some of us, we go, I want that. And so I can show up for other people, and I can dive into that, and I can bring what I've got. But then, for me, at least knowing the brokenness that exists in our world, and knowing the headlines that I wake up to, and knowing the limitations that I feel personally with what I can and what I can't do, we get to week three, and this is my year to make a difference. And part of me, to be very honest, part of me wonders, is that even a possibility? And if you look at that and say, that's how I'm feeling, then I absolutely get it. I totally understand. It's interesting because I think for many of us, from a very young age, we are just captivated by stories of heroism. We see heroes, and that's the life that we want to live, right? We admire the bravery and the courage, the audacity of these characters, that they would stand up for other people, they would live their lives for others and look out after them. I mean, this is the reason why so many of us were drawn to these types of stories. It's the reason why my wife has a small scar on her forehead, because as a young girl, she wanted to be like Superwoman. She wanted to be able to fly as well, but she was thwarted by the evil forces of gravity and a coffee table, right? year after year, we see movies like Marvel is rolling out movie after movie. They're making insane amounts of money, and people continue to see these movies. But something happens in our lives as we age. See, as we get older, we're a little callous to the reality of the real world that we're living in. And we start to recognize that we either haven't or won't become the heroes that we thought we'd end up being. Or maybe we don't see many of those heroes in our world. And so instead, what do we have? We've got scars from the stitches when we tried to fly, or you got bit by a spider, but you're not able to make webs. You can't fly from buildings. You're like, I got a rash and a couple doses of Benadryl, but that's all, right? Or maybe we just feel left with just disappointment or defeat. And we're going, you know what? I don't even know if there's really any use in trying to live this extraordinary life that I wanted to live as a kid. But as I process through that, I begin to wonder that for those who would say, you know, I want to be a follower of Jesus, I want to live the way he did, what if giving up on making an impact in the environments we've been placed in, it actually is not an option? Like, what if the decision to live more of an inward-focused life where we're just kind of concerned with ourselves, that's not a choice? And more so, what if this is not the year where you and I decide we're going to change this world? We're going to solve every imaginable problem, because it's not the year for that. But what if it's the year where we decide, hey, individually and collectively, we are going to show up and we're going to make a difference for those in front of us? So that's something that I go, I can get behind that. I could see that becoming a reality, but I wonder, well, how do we do that? And where do we begin? And how are we supposed to be successful in that when it feels like there's so much that's often just out of our control? Well, as you think about your life, I wonder if you've ever had a time, maybe a moment or a season, where it felt like everything changed for you. Like the way you saw this world, everything changed. And maybe that happened for you when you met a specific friend and it was like that friendship changed everything. Or maybe you had a certain class and the way that professor just introduced ideas, it was like, wow, I saw things differently. Or you spent time abroad, or maybe you got this internship or this job, or it was when you got married that everything changed, or it was when you got divorced, or maybe it was when you became a parent for the first time, or when you experienced a really profound loss. But it was a moment that changed how you saw this world and actually how you live this life. And one of the most influential people who has lived is a man that was named Saul. And we know him as Paul, or the Apostle Paul, or Saint Paul. And he had one of those experiences. See, this was a guy who devoted all of his energy, all of his resources, everything that he could to follow God as best as he could. And in one season of his life, he is doing, out of good intentions, whatever he can to fervently oppose the Jesus movement. But then he has this miraculous encounter where he encounters the risen Jesus, and then everything changes for him. It's like his focus is different. His mission, his motivation, how he's going to use his time and his resources, it all changes for him. So now, every part of his being, it's poured into just helping others experience and hear and receive what he has from God. And so he begins just to preach, just to talk, to share, to travel all over the ancient world and telling people about Jesus. He identifies people that he goes, these will be leaders, and he pours into them. He invests in them. He launches what we would call churches, communities of Jesus followers. He does this with other people, and then when other people abandon him, he does it on his own. He does it when everything is going well, and he does it at times where it's going to mean beatings and imprisonment and certain death. And one of the ways that he would check in with these churches or these communities was to write letters to them. And speaking of that, his longest, most in-depth, most brilliant letter that we have is a document that he wrote to the church in Rome. It's known as Romans. And it's in this letter that Paul, he wants people just to understand the scope of what God has done. And so he lays it all out. And Paul begins and he's saying, hey, when you start with it, when you observe this world, and you look at the beauty of creation, when you see mountains and you see the oceans and the waterfalls and everything, Paul says, well, I think that all is like a road sign. I think it all points to a creator. But despite this inner awareness that we all have of like, hey, this didn't come together on accident, Paul says, well, we've all in our own ways kind of turned our backs on this creator. Like we've all said, okay, that's what he wants, but I'm going to do this instead. So Paul goes, every single one of us, we're all like, nobody's blameless, nobody's without fault. And when we hear a story that begins this way, we go, okay, I know what would come next. So how does the creator punish the creation? How does this God, take out the discipline on the people who have denied him? And Paul explains, like, that is the point. Like, this is where everything you would expect to happen does not take place. Because while we behave sometimes like enemies of God, we ignore his authority, we go away from him, this God moves towards us. That this God is so rich. He's so rich in compassion and forgiveness and mercy. And he's so rich in those things that he chooses to spend it on us to the point that Jesus comes to this earth and he gives his life as a sacrifice on our behalf. And Paul explains now because of that, for those who say, I want to say yes to that, there's no like ounce of condemnation or judgment, no sense of hopelessness, but it's like this completely repaired, reconciled relationship with God. And he says the beautiful thing is that there's nothing that could ever change that. There's nothing that could ever separate you from the love of God. And now he wants the followers to understand that this good news is not just theoretical, it's something that changes absolutely everything, but not just for them, also those on the other side of them. And so after 11 chapters of unpacking this good news, he dives into the difference that it makes in this world. In Romans chapter 12, starting at verse 1, he says, therefore, like in light of the last 11 chapters, in light of how groundbreaking and earth-shattering this is, he says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, somewhere between saying like, hey, I'm asking you and I'm commanding you, like, you got to do this. In view of God's mercy, like in light of how merciful he's been, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And so as Paul is writing, he's writing to people who some are from a Jewish background and others are not, but all are familiar with the idea of bringing a sacrifice to God. Just this concept of taking an animal would pay the sacrifice or atone for their sins or their wrongdoings. And Paul is saying, okay, that's actually no longer needed, but instead there's something greater involved. And he says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And they're like, yeah, that's different. Like that's not a normal sacrifice. And the implication is, hey, this is an ongoing, this is a continual. This is a sacrifice or a daily decision where we say, I'm just going to lay down control to God. And then next he says, this is your true and proper worship. And I like that. And some translations will say this is your spiritual worship or your spiritual act of service. The word used here is logikos. We define it as like reasonable or rational. You look at that word and you look at that and you go, oh, so that's connected to our word logical, right? And Paul is saying, in other words, in light of all we've covered, in light of how God has responded to us, his incredible grace and mercy and patience with us, I mean, giving your whole self to him, it's just like the logical thing to do. It just makes sense. There's this other paraphrase translation. It's called the Jerusalem Bible. It calls this response, worship worthy of thinking beings. I love that idea. He continues, he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Like there's a way of living that's normal among us. There's a flow it's really easy to get caught up in. And Paul says, well, don't do that. Instead, be transformed. Like you were one way and now you're completely different. You were this person and now you're a brand new creation. And we go, I'd like that. So how does that take place, Paul? And he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And he knew something, and it's something that modern science and data has shown conclusively. It's that our mind, our thinking, the way that we see and interpret everything around us in this world, that it not only informs our beliefs, and then that continues and informs our behavior, but if there's ever any behavioral change we want to see in our lives, that we start right there. And so he says, well, let God transform you into this brand new person by changing the way that you think. It's not simply like, hey, buddy, you need an attitude adjustment, but you need a brand new pair of lenses that you see this world with. And he says, when that happens, something takes place. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith that God has distributed to each of you. And I look at that line of don't think of yourself more highly than you ought, and that's perfect like relational intelligence advice, right? Because we know people who they struggle with that, and it's really easy for them to be like, yeah, I'm a pretty important deal. I'm a big deal here. And we go, that's cool. I like that line. But what Paul is hitting out is actually something that's bigger than this. He is aware that within the church in Rome, as well as every ancient church and every modern church, that there are going to be times where there are issues that creep in that start to cause a little bit of division. And sometimes those issues have to do with people's backgrounds or cultures of like, hey, when you're bringing people together, oh, you're trying to figure each other out, like, oh, that's going to rub people the wrong way. And sometimes it has to do with maybe preferences or issues of like conviction or conscience of just like, I don't think we should do that. But he knew something, and it was that if the Jesus community, if the church would change the world, then it had to be a place where people were more than just like putting up with each other. It had to be marked by this utter unity on the things that mattered most and this resolution to work humbly and to work together. And he continues and he says, for just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ, we, though many, form one body. And Paul is doing here, he's introducing what becomes the dominant metaphor that we see in the New Testament writings for how the collective followers of Jesus end up being referred to. It's that together that he's like, we're this body. Like Jesus is the head, but together, like we're all the different parts that make up this body that is active. And then he says, and each member belongs to all the others. And that's definitely a new way of thinking. Everybody belongs to one another. And that stands in contrast to our very, very individualized, autonomous culture, our Western way of thinking of what it means to follow Jesus. Honestly, for me, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. If you were like, Scott, you belong to me. And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, but you belong to me too. Right? It is a brand new way of thinking. Like that's a new mind. That does not look normal in the world that we live in. And he continues and he illustrates the diversity of the gifts or the abilities, literally like the graces that God has given us. So he says, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. So if your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If you have the gift of serving, then serve. If it's teaching, teach. If it's to encourage, give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it's to lead, do it diligently. If it's to show mercy, do it cheerfully. And as he's continuing this explanation of how we respond to the wonderful grace and the treatment of God, he lays out how we can do this individually and collectively, how we can be good news in this world and make a difference. He says, love, well, it must be sincere. Hate what's evil and cling to what's good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. And then he pulls from the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, bless those who persecute you. And some of them were like, seriously? Bless and do not curse. And some of you are like, it's too late for that. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. I love that picture. It's like, hey, at people's highest and lowest moments, show up with them. Be with them. He says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, of humble people. Do not be conceited. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what's right in the eyes of everyone. He says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Don't take revenge, my dear friends. Leave room for God's wrath. Like, let him take care of it. On the contrary, and then he pulls from this proverb chapter 25. He says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. It's this way of saying there's an expectation that exists in this world, right? When people treat you one way, you go, I'm going to get you one back, right? That's how it happens in this world. And he says, don't do that. Don't do that. And he finishes with this great line. I love this. He says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And it's great. But there's questions that the listener and the reader might have as they're taking it all in. And I think one of them is, that's great, Paul, but who actually lives like that? Like, who does that? Because nobody in this world lives that way. And I think Paul would say, exactly. That's pretty much the point. Because when you think like everyone else does, you see this world like everyone else does, and you live like everyone else does. But when your eyes begin to be opened up, you have that life-changing moment, you see the incredible kindness and mercy that was shown to you. Well, what you begin to do is you have this like logical response. And so you just say, hey, me too. I'm going to lay down my life. I'm going to ask God to change the way I think, the way I live, and that changes everything. And it changes everything for us, but it changes everything for those on the other side of us as well. And there's so much that's in this chapter. It would take so much time for us to unpack it. It would take lifetimes for us to try to like perfect that. But when it comes to figuring out how we can live lives that truly feel like they're actually making a difference, what I want to do is I want to begin with what Paul said related to the gifts that we've been given, and three quick observations for us to recognize about these gifts. The first one is that they come from God. They come from God. And you're like, wow, that's fantastic. That was so difficult to see that, Scott. But this is connected to a larger theme that we see in the scriptures. You might refer to it as stewardship. And it's that anything that passes through my hands, any opportunities or resources or relationships that I'm given, like I did not have that on my own. I was trusted or entrusted with that. God's letting me look after that. I love the way that it's illustrated in this other passage in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7. It says, after all, we brought nothing with us when we came into this world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave it. Like we did not arrive as newborns, and you're like, Thomas, Mary, good to meet you. My name is Charlie. So here's the deal. I'm going to need a couple things from you. Maybe some food, some clothing, but otherwise, I've got everything I need, right? Like I brought with me all of the opportunities that I'm going to need. I've brought with me all of the resources. It's like, no, of course not. Like that's not how it is. And this realization, it leaves us feeling like really grateful, really humbled. Like, wow, I was given everything that I have. And it connects to that verse 3 that we saw earlier, where he says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And that's a great attitude we can have, right? Where we go, whoops, I accidentally forgot that everything I had, I didn't create it. It didn't originate from me. And we've seen people who, they struggle with this because they simply believe that they're better than other people because they have an ability, or maybe they were born into some opportunities. And so that's a great spot to begin, recognizing everything we have, these gifts, they come from God. But second is that they differ in function. So as he gives this list, this description of the abilities or the gifts, the graces that we might be able to respond to and show in our lives, we recognize it's not this exhaustive list where everything we could possibly do is included there. There's other passages, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 Peter chapter 4, where he lays out other things. And sometimes these are referred to as spiritual gifts. You may have heard of like taking a spiritual gifts test or a spiritual gift inventory. And some of you go like, hey, intuitively, I know what those abilities or those gifts are. Like I know what I'm able to do well and what I'm good at. Others of us, we go, you know what? I wasn't really sure. I took a test. I didn't really know. But then I tried something out. I gave it a shot and realized like, no, definitely not that thing. But this thing, maybe, possibly. And this point is really simple. It's really straightforward, right? But I think it's helpful to remember because I know for me, I can easily go sideways when I'm aware of the differences of the gifts or the abilities that I have. And I begin to be a little envious of what you're able to do. And I go, well, that's great for them, but I wish I could do that way. And what I have, I mean, it's not necessary. Or we do the other thing where we go, wow, it's pretty fantastic that I'm as awesome as I am, and that's unfortunate for everybody else, right? And we get to a place where it's like, why am I thinking of myself more highly than I ought to? And in the process, we lose sight of this beautiful, powerful metaphor of what it means to be the collective body of Christ, that together, every single one of us, we show up with and we bring the things that God's entrusted us with. And because it is so important for this body to have a healthy amount of variety, well, it's really important that you bring the gifts that you have and I bring the gifts that I have, because without that, we would be an incomplete body. It'd be like, that's great that there's 13 like elbows, but we need some kneecaps here. Because without the parts that were designed to function that way, you cannot do the things that God has in store for you. The last observation I want to make about this is that when it comes to these gifts, they are intended for the benefit of others. And what you'll notice as you look through them is that they're all outward focused. They're all intended to be expressed to and for other people. They're not self-serving in nature. And I think it's really interesting because when it comes to the gifts or the abilities we have, we end up using them in a lot of different ways, none of which are bad or wrong. But I was thinking about that. Sometimes we end up using our gifts for different things. We use our gifts to make an impression. Have you ever done that? Where it's like there's something you're able to do and you use that ability to stand out or to gain an opportunity. Sometimes we use them to make friends. You've done that before. Some of us, you used your gift to make a living. And how cool that we can use these opportunities, these things that we've been given for all of that. But the thought I have is, what if we decided that we would use them to make a difference? What if we decided we would use them to make a spiritual impact, to make things better for those in front of us? And what if we understood that the only way we truly begin to make a dent in this world is if we start right where we're at, we do it together, and we focus on the needs in front of us. A few weeks back, we looked at this story on a weekend here at Terra Nova where Jesus encounters this woman, and she has been bleeding for years and years, and she is in desperate need of help and hope in her life. And as I read through that, the thing that I'm struck with is it's that Jesus has like the weight of the world on his shoulders, in his mind. And anytime people are asking you to do things for them, like the amount of stress, the amount of pressure that feels, it's like, wow, that's just kind of a lot, right? And Jesus constantly has crowds following him, like all these people's agendas, their hopes for him. And in that moment, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands of people who are surrounding him. They're pressing in on him. And yet in that moment, he has the ability, the sensitivity to notice the need that is right in front of him. And that's the thing where I go, wow, I'm not always that good at that. Because I think sometimes being overwhelmed with the needs of everyone, it keeps us from attending to the needs of anyone. And maybe you felt that before. I think sometimes specifically the needs that are right in front of us, like it overwhelms us. It's as though we came into the store, we're looking for one thing, and it was all there. It's a forest of fishing poles, and we're going, I think I'll leave. I think because of all those needs, I'm not able to do anything. And we know that we can't address or meet the needs of the entire world. But the question is, what will you do for the one in front of you? I mean, you can't do everything for everybody, but what will you do for the one in front of you? How will you use the opportunities, the relationships, or the abilities, the resources you've been entrusted with to make a difference? And maybe as that question comes to mind, you start thinking of the different spheres of influence you have, or the people you know, or you go, you know what, okay, at work there's somebody who they're just a little rough around the edges, and everybody kind of stays away from them, but maybe I move towards them. Or there's somebody who it's obvious that they're lonely, and they need connection. And how can I show up and to address that need in front of me? Or you've got a neighbor, and the neighbor, every time they talk with you, they talk about how they're having such a hard time with their kids. And you're like, yeah, me too. And there's this time in my life where here's what helped me. And you go, I have an experience. and I was given something, and maybe I show up for that neighbor in that way. Or maybe the neighbor's like, I don't have any issues with my kids. I have an issue with my garden. And you're like, I can help with that. Like, I've been entrusted with this thing, and how do I show up for the needs in front of me? And when it comes down to it, the individual applications of that are endless. But here's the bigger idea. You know what makes it more likely for us to actually do something? It's when we do it together. And the Jesus movement has always been about collectively being the body, and it's a body that's diverse, a body that's united, it's a body that's determined that we're going to work together, we're going to be collaborative, because we understand that we belong to one another and we actually need one another. And we try to take that posture very seriously at Terra Nova. As we talked about, this is why we try to open up all of our opportunities, just say, hey, what can we do together? We try to make it as easy as possible for everybody to jump in and go, you know what, I've got these unique gifts or backgrounds or experiences, and what can I do to help us be the church that we believe we want to be? And I think that when we soak in this incredible reality of the mercy that God's shown us, there's a natural overflow of it into our lives, and we look for ways to pour it out. And so as we're talking about with this menu, this entire month, we're going to have this out, and you might automatically go, hey, there are areas that I gravitate towards, or I've been doing this, or maybe you just go, you know what, I don't really know. Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I would be good at that, so give it a try. I'm not sure if I can do this. Well, I bet you can. And one of the things that we believe is that we will not be able to be the community that we are called to be, to meet the needs that are in front of us without this whole body functioning as we are. And for me personally, as we talk about these needs, one of the most compelling ways that I think that we can show up and make a difference in the lives of others is just jumping in and to serve kids in the generation that's coming after us and just saying, hey, what can I do to make things better for them? And so as we have that all month long, I would encourage you, if you call Terra Nova home, let's do this together. Let's jump in. Let's start with something. Let's build upon it. But let's be a community that does it together, because I think it's only together that we can make a dent. Being overwhelmed with the needs of everyone, it can keep us from attending to the needs of anyone. And so instead, we say, well, what will we and what will I and what will you do for the one in front of you? And followers of Jesus, we decide that we're going to live differently because our way of thinking and seeing this world has changed. And thus, we work together to use what we've been given to make a difference. And the thing is, as much as we might desire to right every wrong in this world and to address every need, that's actually not the calling that we've been given. Instead, we're called to be successful, but not by being superheroes, simply by being faithful, by using the gifts we've been entrusted with right here in the environment we've been placed in. Let's pray together. God, I thank you so much for the way that you treat us, that you are perfect in mercy, you're generous in forgiveness, you're always moving towards us, even when I move away, and it is our desire that we would just understand and experience you more fully, and that would change us. And so we ask you that as that happens, give us a brand new way of thinking and seeing this world. And it's our desire that this would influence everything about the way we live and how we engage with the people in the world around us. And so we just want to be found faithful with the resources and the relationships and the abilities that you have given us so that we can make a difference in the lives of the people you've placed right in front of us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, that's a brand new series that's kicking off next weekend. And that series was really designed from the ground up to be for your friend or coworker or neighbor or family member that has questions about God and the Bible and Jesus. And so our hope, my hope, is that you'll invite that person, because many of us have already done all the investigating we need to do to find out how good God is. But your neighbors and your friends and your coworkers and your family, they have questions that this series will help answer. So on your chair, when you came in, you probably saw this little postcard-sized invite. That's for you to take with you this week, and think of a person that might come to your mind that could most benefit from being with us starting next weekend. And give that to this person and say, hey, our church is doing this thing. I know you've had questions about God. This is going to help you answer some of those questions and help you kind of make your mind up about what God's all about. And if you want to start a relationship for him, that may be more than you want to say. You might want to just say, hey, our church is doing a series. You should come. That would probably be plenty. By the way, you probably already you also saw this little card that's on your chair. This is just a generic invite card. We've started a new campaign this month where there's going to be signs going up around town. There are flyers or mailers, I should say, that are going to homes in your neighborhood and the neighborhoods around here. So this is just a great thing to keep in your wallet or keep in your car to invite someone just anytime to join us for one of our gatherings here at Terra Nova. So that's next week. And next week is going to be great because we've got all this stuff happening. It is Super Weekend around Terra Nova. And Saturday night, crew, you're getting the best part of it, because as soon as this gathering is over, and I heard it's only a 10-minute message, as soon as this gathering is over, we're going to head next door for wings and a nacho bar. When was the last time you had a nacho bar? I'm going to bet you've never been to a nacho bar, because I've never been to one. But we're going to have one just next door after the Saturday night gathering. We're going to wear our team gear, jerseys, hats, whatever, next weekend, Saturday and Sunday. We've got special stuff happening for kids all weekend long. So this is a great weekend for all of us to gather together, but also because we're kicking off that new series to bring our friends. And I checked, the game starts at like 4 o'clock on Sunday. There is no gathering we have next weekend that will interfere with watching the Super Bowl. And there's an unwritten rule. I've been a church guy for a long time. There's an unwritten rule that if you don't go to church Super Bowl weekend, your team cannot win. So you should be here. There's enough time for Tom Brady to re-up and retire again between our last service and kickoff. So join us next weekend, bring a friend, and we will have a great time together. If there's anything that we do well, it's celebration. So we're going to have a great time next weekend. And then just as we're heading out, just a reminder, if you filled out that Connect card, you can place it in the baskets on your way out. And also, this is our weekly opportunity to give out of all the abundance and all of the goodness that God has shared with us, to remember where it came from and to give a portion of that back. So you can do that as well as you head out tonight. Have a great night, a great week, and we'll see you next weekend for Super Weekend at Terra Nova.